So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Ireland booms while Brexit Britain whimpers next door. So this is parts from an article from the New Statesman, and they do a pretty good job of explaining things here. So credit to them, the rare credit I will give them. So while Joe Biden visits Ireland, Brexiteers said their closest EU neighbours would be, quote, doomed, end quote. Now it's said to be the top performing economy in Europe this year. Those Brexiteers could not be more wrong. Some claim the UK was going to do so well that Ireland would leave the... You can see my cat is not happy about this. They thought that the UK, they thought we would shine that brightly that a former colony would willingly rejoin its coloniser, i.e. Ireland rejoining the United Kingdom. The difference is that Ireland is shining pretty bright right now. It's making a mockery of Brexit, despite it looking like the second biggest victim of Brexit, the first being the UK, of course. But no, Ireland's doing really well, and, I was worried about the situation that Ireland would have fell into. But given the current situation with the Windsor Framework, I am less worried about it, a lot less worried. So Ireland, the US President Joe Biden said before the visit, he said that Ireland was part of his, quote, soul, end quote. Yes, there are less poetic reasons for the Republic of Ireland to be greeted with such fondness on the world stage these days. Its economy is expected to be the best performing in Europe this year, so it's doing really well. It's up there, very high. And where's the United Kingdom? Where is it? Oh, it's got a minus. That's not good. So the Irish economy will grow 4.9%, or it's predicted it will grow 4.9% in 2023, according to the EU Commission. This is a conservative forecast. Ireland's Economic and Social Research Institute think tank predicts the country's economy will grow by 5.5% this year and a huge 6.6% next year. So these are just forecasts, but it looks like Ireland will have potentially a great year, all things considered with the global factors, whilst the UK is looking to be in the negative. The worst in Europe outside of Russia, the worst in the G7 too. We're an outlier. We really have to look at why that is. The entire world had to deal with COVID. Some did better than others. The impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has global impacts too, but only one country has decided to leave a trading bloc with no plan. A trade bloc that was fundamental for their trade, swapping it for a trade partnership, going from what we lost in 4% GDP to 0.08% from the CPTPP. All these other trade deals with less than 1% of our GDP combined do not come close to what we have lost. While the UK government routinely blames ongoing recovery from the pandemic, a global supply chain crisis, and the war in Ukraine for the poor state of the economy, many economists argue the major cause is Brexit. Both the UK exports and imports will be 15% lower in the long run than if the UK had remained part of the EU. The OBR estimates that the pound remains a fifth weaker than the dollar compared to before the referendum. So Ireland, the only EU country with which the UK shares a land border, was repeatedly condemned as doomed during the Brexit negotiations if the UK received a poor deal from Brussels. Quote, the British commentariat was genuinely convinced that Ireland would be clamouring to leave the EU as soon as the UK left because 99.87% of Irish exports, which consist entirely of Guinness and Shillelaghs, went to the UK, end quote, said Dr. Brian Lucy, an economics professor at the College Dublin. And I think you'd have to define the commentariat, because anyone who claimed this is the case, that Ireland would leave the EU and rejoin the UK is, clearly a clown. But, I think this person's clearly joking. Let's be honest now. But let's look at Ireland's kind of top exports. So if we look at the list, Ireland's top exports, you can see pharmaceuticals, organic chemicals, optical, photo, technical, and medical apparatus. And if we have a closer look, Ireland's top exports are pharmaceuticals, so medicines and such. Agriculture is sixth on the list, at least a sector of agriculture, but clearly we're a long way off from Ireland just being an agricultural powerhouse. It's got a strong, diverse manufacturing sector, with the UK falling down with exports to the EU due to trade barriers. It gives Ireland a good opportunity to pick up from what the UK gave up on due to our stupidity with Brexit. And I do wonder, given what the UK does produce here, how much of the stuff could Ireland replace? With example to aircraft and spacecraft supplies, given that the UK had issues with some of those manufacturers because of Brexit. So certain areas of the Irish economy have flourished in recent years, capitalising on the country's access to a market of 450 million people and its 12.5% corporation tax rate. Ireland's tech sector, for example, has seen the likes of Alphabet, who own Google and YouTube, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Intel, and Microsoft set up major operations in the country. The island's 106,000 tech workers are 5 times more productive than the European average, according to the ESRI. So it's not just down to the tax rate, although it does help. The education level of the workers is very important, as well as productivity. Ireland is clearly doing well with those metrics. Speaking English to a high level also helps, because these are predominantly American companies. There's also, the speaking English is also a factor, with the Netherlands picking up a lot more business from the UK as well, because the Dutch have excellent English. It's better than some of the people here, but don't tell them that. So big up the Dutch. Ireland's pharma sector is another success story with 9 of the world's 10 largest pharmaceutical companies building plants in the country. So it's important. It's not just the headquarters; it's the plants, the manufacturing hubs as well. Ireland is now the largest net exporter of pharmaceuticals in the EU, and its products account for over 50% of all exports from the country. So it does surprise me that Northern Ireland is struggling so much for medication, given that Ireland is such a big exporter of medications. Is that because they make a different kind of medication or something? Is there a dosage issue? Like what's up with that? It doesn't make sense on a surface level. And given that Ireland's top export is pharmaceuticals, and that would go to a lot potentially of other EU countries, why would they give that all up to join the UK? It makes no sense. There has long been a, quote, steady trickle, end quote, of companies moving operations from the UK to Ireland, noted Lucy. Dublin's financial sector has been particularly a big winner, with the city attracting 135 financial companies between mid-2016 and early 2021. Around a quarter of all financial firms' Brexit-related moves, according to a report by the think tank New Financial. And if you look at these we still haven't seen the end of financial kind of entities having access to the UK's clearing houses. That'll happen in 2025, depending on how fast Maureen McGuinness and the gang can act on it. But it is taking time, and it's a slow puncture. That's why we're only seeing 135 move to Ireland so far. It'll be a lot more. They're just waiting for access to end, I think. And, it makes sense given Ireland's time zone, which is the same as London. But I think, that's just a small part of it. Ireland has a strong service sector, and some of the traders based in the UK might have English as a first or second language, and they would find it easier, I think, to move to Ireland as the language barriers are less prohibitive. Learning a third or second language can be difficult, especially when you're an adult. Brits do not need a visa to work in Ireland, so if you wanted to continue to work within the EU ecosystem, you don't have to get a visa or going through if you couldn't get one or don't want to get one, Ireland solves that issue thanks to the common travel area. Overall, Ireland makes a lot of sense for relocation from London, as a strong economy, is on the way up, is pretty politically stable, and I'm sure there'll be Irish commentators giving more reasons to add to the list as well. Plus, it also has a massive housing shortage like London, so lots of similarities in that regard. US trade is 3 times more valuable to Ireland than UK trade, and this is wild, but given the US's size, the Americans are a massive outlier in kind of traditional trade theories, like trade rules of gravity, for example, because the US is just massive economy, massive country, and it just buys and sells a lot. So if you look at the top 4 trading partners, you've got the US, Belgium, Germany, and then you've got the UK in 4, which I think the UK will continue to kind of drop off on that list. You've got China in 5, the Netherlands, France, Italy, Japan. Japan's a bit surprising given distance, but again, Japan, another very powerful economy with a large population and decent spending power. So, quote, following Brexit, Ireland stands as the transatlantic gateway to the European Union, end quote, wrote Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou MacDonald in the American Chamber of Commerce report, saying, quote, there is no good Brexit for Ireland, but the economic opportunity is clear, end quote. And it's obvious what she's trying to do is trying to get more business to Ireland from America, for example. Maybe at the detriment of the UK, but probably not too much. But given that it's been written in the American Chamber of Commerce, she's saying to the ones, maybe the Americans who had to move shop or are looking at moving shop from London, they might be saying, look, Ireland's a great opportunity for you guys. Why don't you come here? Ireland in some ways will replace the UK potentially as the gateway into the EU as well for the Americans, and maybe even for other countries. The UK was that for the Americans, lots of trade and lots of companies setting up here. That's on the way down. With the UK in decline and cutting itself out of the EU, it makes sense for the Americans to look for an alternative option, and Ireland is that alternative option, both for the reasons it has for itself, but also what the UK has done stupidly to give up the benefits of setting up here. It's not all positive. Ireland has been hit with high inflation and cost of living pressures, whilst economists point out that Irish GDP figures are typically inflated by foreign multinationals reporting profits in the country. And, Ireland's inflation is lower than the UK's. It does have a housing crisis, which can be difficult to sort out because of politics and the dreaded NIMBYs. So it will depend on who Ireland elects and how strong their will is to sort the housing crisis out. With the GDP stuff, I think it is true that that Ireland's GDP might be slightly inflated because of the multinationals, but it just depends on how GDP is calculated. For now, however, Brexiteers warning about poor Irish prospects have not played out. Quote, "From a headline point of view, the Irish economy is doing well," end quote, said McQuinn. Quote, "Irish firms are switching from the UK to the EU for supplies, which may cause problems for the UK, but represents only limited hassle for Ireland. And Ireland has been preparing for Brexit for a lot longer than the UK has, and they put in actual measures to try and deal with the disruption. And more companies will look to move their supply chains out of Great Britain and into Ireland potentially. Ireland will be a major player in that, and they will be enticing companies saying, "Look, we can support your supply chains, going into Northern Ireland out." No doubt they can do that. And if we look at the inflation, we don't have Ireland on the list. But geez, golly, when you look at the UK, 10.1%, and that's based off this consumer price index, which we know the Bank of England aren't calculating properly because the metrics they use aren't right. Food inflation is massive in this country, and we'll talk about that, along with the other bits that really should go into inflation, things you need to live, not bloody theatre tickets. When we look at the UK, comically high inflation that keeps staying high, despite Sunak promising to halve it by the end of the year, even though, he's going to have a little impact to do with it because the man's a moron, and, clearly he must know how inflation works, that it will come down. If we're still seeing 10.1% by the end of the year, then, that's it. We're cooked at that point. You might as well just turn off the lights and call it a day. The Bank of England being completely clueless as to how to deal with rising inflation. They keep raising interest rates when the simple fact is it's not, the inflation is not being caused really by demand. It's not being caused by excessive amounts of demand. It's not too much money in the average consumer's hands. It's supply side economics that are causing the problems. It's the cost of getting the stuff to the shop rather than just too many people buying the stuff. So the Bank of England raising interest rates makes no sense, but they are run by a bunch of morons. And why would Ireland leave the EU given what a mess Brexit has been? We can all see that. I mean, this list on its own is damning. The UK having record high inflations. But at least we should be able to see the damage Brexit is doing. Even Brexiteers are struggling to justify Brexit, blaming everyone else for the problems that it's caused, saying it's not our fault, it's not the true Brexit, I would have done things differently, if I was in charge, Rome wasn't built in a day, but I wasn't on that particular job, etc. Just sound deluded. Ireland is shining pretty bright right now, whereas Brexit Britain is shrouded in darkness. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.